Sir, a dollar for bread, please. The small voice pierced the silence of Richard Coleman's sprawling Portland mansion, halting the tech titan in his wheelchair. Lily Bennett, an 8-year-old with tattered clothes and a faded pink backpack, stood defiant, her blue eyes blazing with uncanny wisdom. "I'll give you something no one else can," she said, offering to cure his paralysis, a claim that stunned the embittered billionaire. Skeptical, he barked for her removal, but her fearless calm stirred something long dormant in him. "I live behind your estate," she added, pointing to a gap in the storm-damaged fence. What secrets does this child hold? How could she know his hidden past? If this story sparks your curiosity, hit that subscribe button and share where you're reading from. City, time, whatever. Will Lily's promise change Richard's life? Can a dollar buy a miracle? Keep reading to find out. What's your guess for their journey? Rain drummed against the towering windows of Richard Coleman's Portland mansion, a gray veil cloaking the manicured gardens beyond. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of polished oak and solitude. Richard, 62, his silver hair stark against the black leather of his wheelchair, stared at the security monitor flickering on his desk. The image of Lily Bennett lingered in his mind, her tattered clothes, that faded pink backpack, and those piercing blue eyes that held no fear. Her words echoed, "A dollar for bread, and I'll give you a miracle." He snorted, fingers tightening on the armrest. A miracle, as if the world's top neurosurgeons, with their grim scans and grimmer prognoses, hadn't already buried that hope 4 years ago. Yet her audacity gnawed at him. Who was this child, slipping through his estate's defenses like a ghost? And why did her promise stir something he'd long suppressed? "Ellen!" His voice cracked the silence, sharp as a whip. The housekeeper, a wiry woman in her late 50s with graying blonde hair, appeared at the door, her apron slightly askew. "Yes, Mr. Coleman? How did that girl get past security?" Richard's gaze didn't leave the monitor, now showing the empty driveway. "A kid, Ellen. 8 years old, sneaking into a fortress." Ellen's lips pursed, her hands smoothing her apron. "I don't know, sir. The storm last week felled that old oak by the west fence. Must have left a gap." "Must have," Richard muttered, his jaw tight. "Tell Jenkins to fix it. Today." "Of course, sir." Ellen hesitated, her hazel eyes softening. She was unusual, wasn't she? Standing there, bold as brass, talking about miracles. Richard's fingers twitched, brushing the edge of his wheelchair. "Delusional," he said, but the word lacked conviction. He waved Ellen away, his mind already elsewhere. The girl, Lily, had said she lived in the apartments behind his estate. He knew the place, a crumbling complex, all peeling paint and broken dreams, a blight on his pristine view. He'd never set foot there, not even before the accident that stole his legs. Alone again, he wheeled to the window, rain streaking the glass like tears. Portland sprawled beyond, its damp streets and distant bridges a muted watercolor under the overcast sky. 4 years ago, he'd been the king of this city, his AI empire. Coleman Technologies, reshaping industries. Now he was a prisoner in his own home, his world reduced to these walls and the ache in his useless legs. He pressed a button on his desk, summoning his private investigator's number. "Tom, it's Coleman. I need everything on Lily Bennett, 8 years old, who lives in the apartments off Crestwood Lane. Mother's name, school, anything. Now." Tom's voice crackled through. "On it, boss. You want a deep dive?" "Everything," Richard repeated, hanging up. He didn't know why he cared. Maybe it was the way Lily's eyes held his, unflinching, as if she saw through the billionaire to the man beneath. By evening, Tom's email arrived. Lily Bennett, age 8, lived with her mother, Jane Bennett, 34, a night shift cashier at the local Walmart. Jane had worked briefly for Coleman Technologies 5 years ago, in customer support, until the layoffs after Richard's accident. No criminal record, no red flags, just a struggling single mom and a bright kid who aced her schoolwork. The apartments, Tom noted, were a health hazard waiting to happen. Richard's eyes lingered on that line. He'd driven past those buildings once, years ago, their sagging roofs and cracked sidewalks a stark contrast to his gated estate, a health hazard. He pushed the thought aside, but it clung like damp air. The next morning, rain gave way to a drizzle, and Richard found himself glancing at the security monitor more than he cared to admit. At 9:03 a.m., the gate camera buzzed. There she was, Lily, her blonde hair in neat braids, the pink backpack slung over one shoulder. She wore a cleaner hoodie today, but her sneakers were still worn, laces frayed. "Let her in," Richard told Ellen, his voice betraying a flicker of anticipation. "But keep security close." Minutes later, Lily sat across from him in the study, her small frame dwarfed by the leather armchair. Bookshelves loomed behind her, their spines untouched since Richard's accident. "You came back," he said, folding his arms. "I said I would," Lily replied, her voice steady. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is for you." Richard took it, his hands unsteady. Unfolding it, he saw a child's drawing, a man standing by a lighthouse on a beach, no wheelchair in sight. Scrawled beneath in crayon, "Mr. Richard at Cannon Beach." His breath caught. Cannon Beach. 25 years ago, he'd walked that shore alone, a young man with a dream to build an AI empire. No one knew that moment, not his ex-wife, not his old friends. "How do you know about Cannon Beach?" he demanded, his voice low. Lily shrugged, her eyes bright. "I dream things sometimes. Mom calls it my heart's dreams. I saw you in an old company photo at home. You look sad, even smiling." Richard's pulse quickened. "What else do you know?" "You hold your grandpa's fountain pen when you're alone," she said softly. "It reminds you of when you believed in big things." The room spun. That pen, locked in its wooden box on his desk, was his private ritual. No one knew. "If this is a trick," he said, leaning forward, "you're the best con artist I've ever met." "I'm not tricking you," Lily said, her gaze unwavering. "I'm here because you need me." Richard stared, his skepticism warring with a strange pull in his chest. He wanted to dismiss her, to call security and end this nonsense. But her words, her certainty, held him captive. "Ellen," he called, his voice hoarse. "Get her $1." Ellen handed Lily a crisp bill, which the girl tucked carefully into her backpack. "Thank you," Lily said, standing. "I'll be back tomorrow to start your miracle." As she left, her small figure disappearing down the hall, Richard wheeled to the desk. He opened the wooden box, the fountain pen gleaming inside. His fingers traced its cool metal, and for the first time in years, he felt something other than bitterness. A spark, fragile but undeniable. He didn't believe in miracles. Not yet. But as the rain tapped the windows, he couldn't shake the feeling that Lily Bennett, with her pink backpack and impossible promise, had just cracked open a door he'd long thought sealed shut. What was she? A dreamer? A fraud? Or something else entirely? He didn't know. But he'd find out. The drizzle had softened to a mist by morning, cloaking Richard Coleman's Portland mansion in a ghostly haze. Inside his study, the fountain pen lay open on the desk, its silver gleam catching the dim light of a desk lamp. Richard hadn't slept. Lily Bennett's drawing of Cannon Beach haunted him, its crude lines etched in his mind like a map to a forgotten self. Her words, "You need me," looped relentlessly, a challenge he couldn't dismiss. He wheeled to the window, the city's skyline blurred beyond the estate's iron gates. 4 years ago, he'd ruled that skyline, his AI empire a beacon of innovation. Now he was a relic, his dreams as broken as his spine. Yet a child had breached his walls, offering miracles with the certainty of sunrise. Was she a fraud, a dreamer, or something more? "Ellen," he called, his voice rough from sleeplessness. The housekeeper appeared, her graying blonde hair pinned neatly, eyes wary. "Sir?" "Tell Jenkins to double security patrols," Richard said, his gaze fixed on the mist. "And get me everything on Jane Bennett. Employment history, finances, anything." Ellen's brow furrowed. "The girl's mother? Sir, is this wise?" Richard's eyes snapped to her. "A child knows things she shouldn't, Ellen. Things no one could know. I need answers." Ellen nodded, but her hesitation lingered as she left. Richard's fingers grazed the pen, its weight anchoring him. Lily's knowledge of it, his private ritual, unsettled him more than Cannon Beach. He'd hidden that pen from the world, a tether to his grandfather's faith in him, a faith he'd lost in himself. By noon, Tom, the investigator, sent a file. Jane Bennett, 34 single mother, worked nights at Walmart, scraping by on $12 an hour. Her brief stint at Coleman Technologies ended with the post-accident layoffs, a restructuring led by Mark Reynolds, Richard's old friend and now deputy CEO. The apartments, Tom wrote, were a ticking time bomb of code violations: mold, faulty wiring, chemical residue from shoddy construction. Richard's jaw tightened. He remembered Mark's smooth assurances after the accident. "We'll handle the company, Rich. Focus on recovery, recovery." A bitter laugh escaped him. Mark had seized control while Richard drowned in painkillers and despair. Had Jane been collateral damage in Mark's ambition? And Lily, how did she fit? The gate buzzer jolted him from his thoughts. The security monitor showed Lily, her pink backpack bright against the gray day, a plastic grocery bag dangling from her hand. Bread, he realized, bought with his dollar. "Let her in," he told Ellen, his pulse quickening. Lily entered the study, her sneakers squeaking on the hardwood. She set the grocery bag on the floor, revealing a loaf of white bread, and pulled a small stone from her backpack. "For you," she said, placing it on his desk. "It's from the park. Smooth, like hope." Richard stared at the stone, its surface worn by time. "Hope," he echoed, his voice flat. "You think a rock and a drawing will make me walk?" Lily tilted her head, braids swaying. "Not yet, but they're part of it." He leaned forward, his skepticism a shield. "How do you know things, Lily? My pen, Cannon Beach? Who told you?" "Nobody told me," she said, her eyes clear. "I dreamed them. My heart's dreams. I saw you in Mom's old work photo, from your company. You looked so sad." Richard's chest tightened. "Sad," he repeated, the word a blade. "What else do your dreams say?" "You used to build things to help people," Lily said softly. "Now you hide, but you don't have to." He gripped the armrests, her words slicing through years of defenses. "You don't know me, kid." "I know enough," she countered, undaunted. "I'll be back tomorrow." As she turned to leave, Richard's voice stopped her. "Your mother worked for me. Did you know that?" Lily nodded. "She answered phones. She liked helping people. Then they fired her." The simplicity of her words stung. "Did she tell you to come here? Is this her idea?" Lily's eyes widened. "No, Mom doesn't know I'm here. She thinks I'm at the library." Richard searched her face for deceit but found only earnestness. "Go home, Lily, and don't sneak in again." She smiled, unperturbed. "See you tomorrow, Mr. Richard." When the door closed, Richard wheeled to the desk, the stone cool under his fingers. He opened Tom's file again, his eyes lingering on Jane's photo. A tired woman with Lily's blonde hair, her smile strained. He dialed Tom. "Dig deeper on the apartments, construction records, permits, everything, and cross-check with Coleman Technologies' old projects." Tom hesitated. "That's a lot of dirt to stir, boss. You sure?" "Do it," Richard snapped, hanging up. That night he dreamed of Cannon Beach, the lighthouse stark against a stormy sky. He stood, not wheeled, the sand firm beneath his feet. A child's voice called his name, but when he turned, no one was there. He woke with a start, sweat beading his brow, the pen still clutched in his hand. He didn't believe in miracles. He didn't believe in dreams. But Lily's presence was a pebble in his shoe, impossible to ignore. She knew too much, saw too much. Was she a con, coached by a desperate mother? Or was there something else, something he'd stopped believing in long ago? The next day loomed, and with it, Lily's promised return. Richard's fingers tightened on the stone. He'd get answers, one way or another. But deep down, a part of him feared what those answers might reveal. Not about Lily, but about himself. The morning mist clung to Portland's edges, a shroud over Richard Coleman's estate. In his study, the smooth stone from Lily Bennett sat on the desk beside the fountain pen, both glowing faintly in the dawn light. Richard's eyes burned from another sleepless night, his dream of Cannon Beach. a fleeting moment of standing, still clawing at his thoughts. Lily's words, "You don't have to hide," echoed like a taunt. He didn't hide. He survived. Yet her presence, her impossible knowledge, chipped at the walls he'd built around his broken life. His phone buzzed. Tom's name flashed on the screen. Richard answered, his voice clipped. "What did you find?" "Trouble," Tom said, his tone grim. "The Crestwood Apartments, built by a Coleman Technologies subsidiary, Horizon Properties 8 years ago. Shoddy materials, skipped inspections. Reports of chemical leaks were buried under Mark Reynolds' orders." Richard's grip tightened on the phone. "Mark? He signed off on everything," Tom said. "Saved millions, endangered lives." "I'm still digging, but it's ugly, boss." "Keep digging," Richard said, hanging up. His gaze fell to the stone, its surface a silent accusation. Mark, his friend since college, had been his rock after the accident, steering the company while Richard drowned in grief. Had it all been a lie? The thought twisted like a knife. Ellen knocked softly, her face etched with concern. "Sir, the girl's at the gate again." Richard's pulse quickened. "Bring her in." Lily entered, her pink backpack slung low, a new drawing clutched in her hands. Her sneakers, still frayed, left faint wet marks on the hardwood. She sat, her blue eyes scanning him like they saw past his skin. "You didn't sleep," she said, not a question. He raised an eyebrow. "You're observant." "I brought you this." She slid the drawing across the desk, a crude sketch of a man on a pier, waves crashing below. No wheelchair. Scrawled in crayon, "Mr. Richard, believing again." His throat tightened. "Another dream?" Lily nodded. "You stood there once, didn't you? Thinking you could change the world." Richard's mind flashed to that pier 25 years ago, the salt air sharp as he vowed to build an empire. "Stop it," he snapped, his voice harsher than intended. "How do you know these things? Is your mother feeding you stories?" Lily's eyes widened. "Mom doesn't know I'm here. She'd be mad." "Then who?" he pressed, leaning forward. "Someone's using you." "Nobody," she said firmly. "I just know. Like I know you're scared to hope." He froze, her words a mirror to his sleepless fears. "I'm not scared," he lied, his voice low. "I'm practical. Miracles don't exist." "They do," Lily said, her voice soft but unyielding. "You'll see at Cannon Beach." He scoffed, but his fingers brushed the drawing, its lines stirring something he couldn't name. "Go home, Lily. Your mother needs you." She stood unfazed. "I'll be back tomorrow. Don't give up, Mr. Richard." As she left, Ellen lingered in the doorway. "She's something, that girl. Reminds me of you, back when you believed in things." Richard's jaw clenched. "That was a long time ago, Ellen." "Doesn't have to be," she said quietly, then left. Alone, Richard opened his laptop, pulling up old company records. Horizon Properties. The name was buried in financials, a failed venture he'd barely noticed before the accident. Mark's signature was everywhere. Contracts, approvals, cost-cutting measures. Chemical leaks. The words burned. Had Mark known? Had he hidden this to protect the company? Or himself? His phone rang again. Mark's name glowed on the screen. Richard's thumb hovered, then pressed answer. "What do you want?" "Rich, what's this I hear about you poking into old projects?" Mark's voice was smooth, too smooth. "You're stirring up trouble." "Trouble?" Richard's tone was ice. Like burying reports of toxic materials in our buildings?" A pause. "You're out of your depth," Mark said, his warmth gone. "Let the past stay buried." "Not this time," Richard said, hanging up. His heart pounded. Mark's defensiveness confirmed it. Something was rotten in Coleman Technologies. He wheeled to the window, the mist thinning to reveal Portland's gray sprawl. The apartments loomed in his mind, a festering wound tied to his company. To him. He dialed Tom again. "Get me everything on Mark's involvement. Personal accounts, emails, anything." "That's a big ask," Tom said. "You're sure?" "Do it," Richard said, his voice steel. That evening, Jane Bennett's face flashed in his thoughts, her tired smile from Tom's file, so like Lily's. He'd never known her at the company, one of hundreds cut loose in Mark's restructuring. But Lily's words, she liked helping people, gnawed at him. He opened a drawer, pulling out a faded photo from the company's early days. He stood in it, grinning, Mark at his side. They'd been brothers once, or so he'd thought. A knock broke his reverie. Ellen, her face pale. "Sir, there's a woman at the gate. Jane Bennett. She's upset. Says it's about her daughter." Richard's stomach dropped. "Let her in." Jane stormed into the study, her blonde hair disheveled, Walmart apron askew. "Mr. Coleman, why is my daughter coming here?" Her voice trembled, but her green eyes were fierce. "She's been sneaking out, talking about you." "What's going on?" Richard raised a hand, steadying himself. "I don't know how she knows things, Jane. Things about me. Private things. She says it's dreams." Jane's face softened, but worry lingered. "Lily's always been different. She dreams about people, knows things she shouldn't. But this? Coming to your house?" "She offered me a miracle," Richard said, the word heavy. "To walk again." Jane's breath hitched. "She's 8. She believes in fairy tales." "Maybe," Richard said, his eyes on the drawing. "But she's not wrong about everything." Jane sank into a chair, exhausted. "She's sick, Mr. Coleman. A fever that won't break. She keeps saying she has to help you." Richard's heart stuttered. "Sick?" "The doctor says it's a virus," Jane said, voice cracking. "But she's never been this fixated." He leaned forward, the stone cold under his fingers. "Take her to Seattle General. I'll cover everything." Jane's eyes widened. "Why would you?" "Because I need to know," he said, cutting her off. "If she's right about me, I need to know why." As Jane left, her reluctance clear, Richard stared at the drawing. Cannon Beach, a miracle. He didn't believe in either. But the cracks in his world were spreading, and Lily Bennett was at the center. The mist had burned off by noon, leaving Portland's skyline sharp against a pale sky. In Richard Coleman's study, the air was thick with tension. The stone from Lily Bennett in her latest drawing. A man on a pier believing again, mocking him from the desk. Jane's words, "She's sick," echoed like a drum beat, her daughter's fever tying Richard to a guilt he couldn't name. He stared at the laptop, Horizon Properties buried reports glowing on the screen. Mark Reynolds' signature stained every page, a betrayal etched in ink. Richard's fingers hovered over his phone. Mark's call yesterday, "Let the past stay buried," had been a warning, but the truth was clawing its way out. He dialed Tom, his voice low. "What else on Mark?" Tom's reply was clipped. "Shell companies rich, funds siphoned through Horizon, millions unaccounted for. Emails link Mark to the contractor who used toxic materials." He knew. Richard's chest tightened. "Knew what?" "Chemicals in the apartments," Tom said. "Linked to health issues, fevers, respiratory problems, especially in kids." He buried the complaints. The phone nearly slipped from Richard's hand. Lily's fever, the apartments, his company. "Send me everything," he said, hanging up. His gaze fell to the drawing, Lily's crayon lines a silent plea. A knock broke the silence. Ellen, her face drawn, stood at the door. "Sir," Ms. Bennett called. "Lily's worse. They're transferring her to Seattle General." Richard's heart lurched. "When?" "Now," Ellen said. "She's asking for you." He nodded, his mind racing. "Get the car ready. I'm going." Ellen hesitated. "Sir, are you sure? You haven't left the estate in months." "Do it," he snapped, wheeling toward the door. The thought of Lily, frail and feverish, propelled him forward, her promise of a miracle now a weight he couldn't shake. The drive to Seattle was a blur, rain streaking the Bentley's windows as Portland faded behind. Richard clutched the stone, its smoothness a tether to reality. He'd sent Jane ahead with his private jet, covering every cost, but guilt gnawed at him. If Mark's greed had poisoned those apartments, if Lily's illness was tied to Coleman Technologies, then his legacy was a curse. At Seattle General, the hospital's sterile halls smelled of antiseptic and fear. Jane met him outside Lily's room, her blonde hair tangled, eyes red-rimmed. "She's stable, but the fever's stubborn," she said, voice cracking. "They're testing for toxins now." "Toxins?" Richard's voice was hoarse. Tom's words, linked to health issues, ringing in his ears. Jane nodded, hugging herself. "They think it's environmental. From the apartments. His stomach churned. Can I see her? Jane let him in. Lily lay small against the hospital bed, monitors beeping softly, an IV snaking into her arm. Her cheeks were flushed, but her blue eyes brightened at him. Mr. Richard, she whispered, her voice weak. You came. Of course, he said, wheeling closer, his throat tight. How's my miracle maker? She smiled faintly. Tired, but I dreamed you again. At Cannon Beach. You were standing. Richard's breath hitched. Lily, you need to rest. No more dreams. They're not just dreams, she said, her gaze intense. You have to go there. Promise. He wanted to argue, to tell her miracles were fantasies, but her earnestness stopped him. I promise, he said, the words heavy. Jane touched Lily's hair, her voice soft. Sweetie, sleep now. As Lily's eyes closed, Richard wheeled out, Jane following. Why is she so fixated on you? She asked, her voice a mix of worry and wonder. I don't know, Richard admitted, but she knows things, private things, about my past. Jane's eyes searched his. She's always been like that. She dreamed about my mom's heart attack before it happened. I don't understand it, but I trust her. Richard nodded, the stone heavy in his pocket. I'll find out what's making her sick. Whatever it takes. Back in the car, his phone buzzed. Mark. He answered, his voice cold. What? Rich. You're making waves, Mark said, his tone edged with panic. Calling investigators, digging into Horizon? You're hurting the company. The company? Richard's voice rose. You poison people, Mark. Kids. You hit it. A sharp intake of breath. You don't know what you're talking about. Drop this or you'll regret it. Too late, Richard said, hanging up. His hands shook. Mark's threat confirmed it. He was complicit. But how deep did it go? Tom's next email arrived as the car pulled into Portland. Attachments detailed Mark's shell companies, payments to silence inspectors, and a single line that stopped Richard cold. Meeting scheduled with contractor day before your accident. His blood ran cold. The accident. The brake failure no mechanic could explain. Had Mark orchestrated it? The thought was a splinter, sharp and impossible to ignore. He dialed Tom. Check Mark's communications around my accident. Every call, every email. That's a dangerous road, Tom warned. You sure? Do it, Richard said, his voice steel. At the mansion, Ellen greeted him, her face pale. A news alert, sir. It's about you. Richard grabbed his tablet. A headline screamed, Coleman's mental decline threatens tech giant. The article, anonymous but dripping with Mark's style, painted him as unstable, unfit to lead. His jaw clenched. Mark was fighting dirty, trying to discredit him before he could expose the truth. But Richard wasn't the broken man of 4 years ago. Lily's drawings, her dreams, her fever, they'd woken something in him. He wheeled to the desk, the stone and drawing beside the pen. Lily's voice whispered, You don't have to hide. He didn't know if she was right about miracles, but he knew one thing. Mark's secrets would burn, and he'd light the match. Tomorrow he'd face the board. Tonight he'd plan. The cracks in his world were widening, and Lily, sick but unyielding, was the key to it all. The Portland dawn broke cold and clear, sunlight slicing through the curtains of Richard Coleman's study. The stone from Lily Bennett, her drawing of the pier, and his grandfather's fountain pen lay scattered on the desk. Silent witnesses to his sleepless resolve. Mark Reynolds' betrayal, toxic apartments, buried complaints, and that chilling email about Richard's accident burned in his mind. Today he'd face the board, expose Mark's rot, and fight for Lily, whose fever tied his guilt to her fragile hope. Richard adjusted his tie, the mirror reflecting a man he barely recognized. Not the broken recluse of 4 years ago, but someone sharper, driven. Lily's voice, You don't have to hide, echoed, her dreams of Cannon Beach a beacon he couldn't ignore. He wheeled out, Ellen's worried gaze following. Sir, the car's ready, she said, her voice soft. Are you sure about this? Never sure, Richard replied, his jaw set. The drive to Coleman Technologies' headquarters was silent, the city's glass towers glinting like knives. Richard clutched Lily's stone, its weight grounding him. His phone buzzed. Jane's number. He answered, heart racing. "How's Lily?" "Worse," Jane's voice cracked. "The fever spiked again. They're running more tests, but she keeps saying your name, Mr. Coleman. Cannon Beach." Richard's throat tightened. "I'm handling it, Jane. Everything. She'll get the best care." "Thank you," Jane whispered, then hung up. The headquarters loomed ahead, or a sleek monolith of steel and glass. Richard hadn't entered it since the accident, his empire run by Mark while he withered in isolation. Today, that ended. The boardroom was a battlefield, its polished table reflecting the faces of 12 executives, some familiar, some Mark's allies. Mark stood at the head, his tailored suit masking the panic Richard had heard in his voice. "Rich," he said, his smile tight. "Didn't expect you in person." "Clearly," Richard said, wheeling to the table's end. The room stilled, eyes darting between them. "Let's skip the pleasantries. I've added an agenda item, a review of Horizon properties." Mark's smile faltered. "That's ancient history, Rich. Hardly worth the board's time." "I disagree," Richard said, his voice steel. He tapped his tablet, projecting a report onto the screen. Horizon's toxic materials, buried complaints, Mark's signatures. "This is what happens when profit trumps people. Chemical leaks, sick residents, children in hospitals." A murmur rippled through the room. Elaine Carter, a veteran board member with gray hair and sharp eyes, leaned forward. "These are serious claims, Richard." "They're facts," Richard said, switching to a photo of the Crestwood apartments, cracked walls, rusted pipes. "Mark approved substandard materials, hid health risks. People are suffering. A child is fighting for her life because of it." Mark's face reddened. "This is slander. You've been out of the game for years, Rich. You're seeing conspiracies where there's just business." "Business?" Richard's voice rose, cutting through the room. "You siphoned millions through shell companies, Mark. You silenced inspectors. And now I find a meeting with a contractor the day before my accident. Care to explain?" The room froze. Mark's eyes widened, a flicker of fear betraying him. "You're unhinged," he said, his voice low. "This is grief talking, not reason." Elaine cleared her throat. "Richard, do you have evidence?" "Enough to warrant an audit," Richard said, sliding a folder across the table. "Bank records, emails, contracts. I'm calling for an independent investigation into Horizon and Mark's leadership." Mark slammed his hand on the table. "This is a witch hunt. The board won't stand for it." "They will," Richard said, his gaze sweeping the room. "I still hold majority shares, and I'm resuming active leadership, effective now." A tense silence followed. Elaine nodded slowly. "I move we approve the audit." Seconded murmurs followed, drowning Mark's protests. His face paled, his control slipping. "You'll destroy everything we built," he hissed, leaning toward Richard. "No," Richard said evenly. "You did that." As the meeting adjourned, Mark stormed out, his parting glare a promise of retaliation. Richard exhaled, exhaustion seeping into his bones. He'd won this round, but the war was far from over. Back at the mansion, Ellen met him with a tray of coffee, her face tight. "A call from Seattle, sir. It's urgent." Richard grabbed the phone, Jane's voice trembling through. "Lily's critical. The toxins, they're attacking her liver. They're prepping her for a specialist in Boston." His heart stopped. "Boston?" "I can't afford it," Jane said, sobbing, "but she needs it." "I'll handle it," Richard said, his voice firm. "My jet's ready. Go now." Jane's gratitude was choked by tears. "Why are you doing this?" Richard glanced at the drawing on his desk. "Because she's right about me. I don't know how, but she is." Hanging up, he wheeled to the window, Portland's lights blurring below. Lily's fever, her dreams, her life, they were tied to his company's sins, to Mark. He opened Tom's latest email, a grainy photo of Mark meeting a man in a diner, dated the week before Richard's accident. The man's name, Carl Hayes, a mechanic with a rap sheet. Richard's blood ran cold. The brakes, the crash. Mark hadn't just buried reports, he'd buried Richard. He dialed Tom. "Find Hayes. I need him to talk." "This is deep water, Rich," Tom warned. "You ready for what you might find?" "I have to be," Richard said, his voice a blade. The stone weighed heavy in his pocket. Lily's voice, "You have to go to Cannon Beach," rang in his ears. He didn't believe in miracles, not yet, but he believed in justice. Mark would answer for his crimes and Lily would live. He'd make sure of it. Tomorrow he'd chase the truth. Tonight he'd pray, for the first time in years, that Lily's dreams held more than fairy tales. Portland's twilight cast long shadows across Richard Coleman's estate, the city's lights flickering like distant stars. In his study, the stone from Lily Bennett sat heavy on the desk, flanked by her drawing of the pier and the fountain pen, relics of a fight he couldn't abandon. The boardroom victory over Mark Reynolds felt hollow with Lily's life hanging by a thread, her liver failing under the weight of toxins tied to his company's sins. The grainy photo of Mark meeting Carl Hayes, a mechanic with a criminal past, burned in Richard's mind, a clue to the brake failure that stole his legs 4 years ago. He gripped his phone, Tom's voice crackling through. "Hayes is a ghost, Rich. Last known address was a dive bar in Tacoma. I'm tracking leads, but he's slippery." "Find him," Richard said, his voice ablade. "He's the key to Mark." Tom hesitated. "This is bigger than you think. Mark's shell companies have ties to some nasty players. Watch your back." Richard hung up, his pulse hammering. Mark's betrayal wasn't just greed. It was calculated, maybe even murderous. The thought chilled him, but Lily's frail voice, "You have to go to Cannon Beach," drove him forward. Her dreams, her fever, her life were his responsibility now. Ellen appeared, her graying hair loose, eyes shadowed. "A call from Boston, sir. Miss Bennett." Richard's heart lurched. He grabbed the phone, Jane's voice trembling through. "Lily's in surgery. The toxins, they're worse than we thought. They're trying a new treatment, but it's risky." "Is she stable?" Richard asked, his throat tight. "For now," Jane said, her voice breaking. "She woke up before they took her in. Kept saying you'd find your miracle at Cannon Beach." Richard's fingers tightened on the stone. "I'm sending a specialist from Johns Hopkins. Whatever she needs, Jane." "Why?" Jane's voice was raw. "Why do you care so much?" He glanced at the drawing, its crayon lines a lifeline. "Because she saw something in me I'd forgotten. I owe her." Jane's sob echoed through the line. "Thank you," she whispered, then hung up. Richard wheeled to the window, Portland's skyline a blur of guilt and rage. Lily's surgery, Mark's treachery, the mechanic's shadow. They wove a web he couldn't escape. He opened his laptop, scanning Tom's latest files. Emails between Mark and a contractor mentioned resolving leadership issues days before the accident. Leadership issues. The words twisted like a knife. Had Mark tried to kill him? A news alert pinged. Coleman Technologies faces investor backlash over audit. Mark's handiwork, no doubt, spinning Richard's push for truth as instability. He slammed the laptop shut, his breath ragged. Mark wasn't just fighting for control, he was fighting for survival. The phone rang. Tom again. "Got a lead on Hayes," he said. "He's holed up in a motel outside Seattle. I'm heading there now." "Take backup," Richard said. "And Tom, don't let him slip." "Copy that," Tom said, the line going dead. Richard's gaze fell to the drawing. Cannon Beach. Lily's insistence gnawed at him, her dreams an enigma he couldn't unravel. He didn't believe in miracles, but her knowledge, his pen, the pier, his past, was no coincidence. Was she psychic, guided by something else, or just a child with an uncanny gift? Ellen returned, her face pale. "Sir, there's something else. A package at the gate. No sender, just your name." Richard's stomach dropped. "Bring it in. Carefully." Minutes later, Ellen set a small box on the desk, her hands trembling. Richard opened it, revealing a single item, a brake pad, rusted and scored. A note tucked beneath read, "Some things stay buried." No signature, but Mark's shadow loomed large. He called security. "Triple patrols, lock down the estate." Ellen's eyes widened. "Sir, what's happening?" "Someone's scared," Richard said, his voice low. "And they should be." That night he dreamed again, of Cannon Beach, the lighthouse stark against a stormy sky. He stood, legs strong, but a child's voice called, faint and fading. He woke gasping, sweat soaking his shirt, the brake pad's image seared in his mind. Mark wasn't just hiding secrets, He was threatening to bury them again. By morning, Tom's call shattered the silence. Hayes talked, he said, voice tense. He tampered with your brakes. Mark paid him through a shell company. I've got a recording. Richard's world tilted. Send it to me. And the police. Already done, Tom said. But Hayes is spooked. Says Mark's got friends in high places. Let him run, Richard said, his voice ice. He can't hide forever. He opened the recording, Hayes' voice rough. Reynolds wanted Coleman out. Said he was a liability. Paid me 10 grand to make it look like an accident. The words confirmed what Richard feared. Mark had tried to kill him, and now Lily was paying the price for his greed. He dialed Jane. Any news? She's out of surgery, Jane said, exhausted. Stable but critical. They're hopeful, but it's touch and go. Hang in there, Richard said, his voice firm. I'm coming to Boston. Jane's voice softened. She'd like that. Hanging up, Richard stared at the drawing. Lily's dreams had led him here, to Mark's downfall, to a truth he'd never sought alone. He didn't know what waited at Cannon Beach, but he'd go. For her, for himself. He called Ellen. Book a jet to Boston and prepare for a trip to Cannon Beach after. Her eyes widened. Sir? Just do it, he said, wheeling toward the door. The brake pad lay on the desk, a grim reminder of Mark's reach. But Richard wasn't the man Mark had tried to break. Lily's faith, her dreams, had lit a fire he couldn't extinguish. Mark would fall. Lily would live. And Cannon Beach, whatever it held, was calling. The Boston skyline glittered through the hospital window, a stark contrast to the sterile hush of Lily Bennett's room. Richard Coleman wheeled in, the stone from her park gift heavy in his pocket, its smoothness a tether to the fight he'd vowed to win. The recording of Carl Hayes' confession, Mark Reynolds paid to sabotage his brakes, burned in his mind, a betrayal as raw as the monitors beeping around Lily's frail form. Her surgery had stabilized her, but the toxins from his company's negligence still clung to her life like a shadow. Jane Bennett sat by the bed, her blonde hair limp, eyes hollow from sleepless nights. She looked up, relief flickering across her pale face. You came, she said, her voice a whisper. Promised I would, Richard said, his gaze on Lily. Her cheeks were less flushed, but the IV lines and monitors painted a grim picture. How is she? Better, Jane said, stroking Lily's hand. The treatment's working, but it's slow. They say she might wake soon. Richard nodded, his throat tight. Lily's dreams, you'll stand at Cannon Beach, had led him to Mark's treachery, to this hospital room, to a truth he couldn't unsee. She's strong, he said, the words more for himself than Jane. Jane's eyes met his, searching. Why are you here, Mr. Coleman? Really? He hesitated, the stone's weight grounding him. She saw something in me, something I'd buried. I owe her for that. Jane's lips trembled, a faint smile breaking through. She's always seen things, people's hearts, their pain. I never understood it, but I believe her. Before Richard could reply, a doctor entered, her clipboard crisp against her white coat. Miss Bennett, Mr. Coleman, she said, nodding. Lily's responding well. The toxins are clearing, but we're monitoring her liver closely. We'll know more in 48 hours. Richard exhaled, a knot loosening. Whatever she needs, specialists, treatments, I'll cover it. The doctor's eyes softened. We're grateful. She's a fighter. As the doctor left, Richard's phone buzzed. Tom's name flashed. He stepped into the hall, his voice low. What do you have? Trouble, Tom said, his tone grim. Mark's moving fast. He's rallied board members, claiming you're unfit to lead. There's a vote tomorrow to block your audit. Richard's jaw clenched. He's cornered. And dangerous, Tom added. Hayes vanished again. My contact says Mark paid him to disappear. And Rich, there's chatter. Someone's watching your estate. The brake pad from the anonymous package flashed in his mind. Some things stay buried. Tighten security, Richard said, and find Hayes. He's not done talking. On it, Tom said, the line going dead. Richard returned to Lily's room, his mind racing. Mark's retaliation was escalating, a desperate bid to protect his secrets. But Lily's life, Jane's trust, and the truth about his accident demanded he push forward. Lily stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Mr. Richard," she murmured, her voice faint but clear. He wheeled closer, his heart lifting. "Hey, miracle maker, you scared us." She smiled weakly. "You didn't give up." "Not a chance," he said, his voice soft. "You told me to go to Cannon Beach. I'm listening." Her eyes brightened, despite the fatigue. "It's where you'll find it, your miracle." Jane's hand tightened on Lily's, her voice gentle. "Sweetie, rest now." But Lily's gaze held Richard's. "You're not scared anymore, are you?" He paused, her words cutting deep. Scared. He'd been terrified of hope, of failure, of facing the man he'd been before the accident. "Not as much," he admitted, the stone warm in his pocket. Lily's smile widened, then her eyes closed, sleep reclaiming her. Jane wiped a tear. "She's never been wrong about her dreams. Not once." Richard nodded, his resolve hardening. "I'll be back tomorrow, Jane. Call if anything changes." Outside, Boston's chill bit through his coat as he wheeled to the car. His phone pinged. A news alert. Coleman Technologies faces leadership crisis. Mark's smear campaign was in full swing, painting Richard as a paranoid recluse. He clenched his fists. Mark wasn't just fighting for control, he was fighting to erase him. Back at the hotel, Richard opened Tom's latest file, a cryptic email from Mark to an unknown recipient, dated the day of his accident. Problem handled. Clear the way. His blood ran cold. The brakes. The crash. Mark hadn't just wanted him out, he'd wanted him dead. He called Ellen, his voice steady despite the rage. "Book a flight to Portland for tomorrow, and arrange a car to Cannon Beach after the board vote." "Sir," Ellen said, her voice hesitant. "Are you sure? The news, the threats?" "I'm sure," he said, cutting her off. "Mark's finished. And Lily, she's right about something." Hanging up, he stared out at Boston's skyline, the city's lights a stark reminder of his old empire. Lily's dreams had pulled him from isolation, forced him to face Mark's betrayal, and now pointed him to Cannon Beach. He didn't know what waited there, a miracle, a memory, or just a child's hope, but he'd go. For her, for himself. His phone buzzed again. "Tom. Found Hayes's last call log. He contacted Mark yesterday. They're meeting tonight. A warehouse in Portland." Richard's pulse spiked. "Get eyes on it. Don't let Mark slip." "Already there," Tom said. "But Rich, this feels like a trap." "Let it be," Richard said, his voice steel. "I'm done running." The stone in his pocket felt heavier, Lily's words a lifeline. "You're not scared anymore." He wasn't. Not of Mark, not of the truth. Cannon Beach loomed, a promise and a reckoning. Tomorrow he'd face the board, confront Mark's trap, and chase the miracle Lily swore he'd find. The Portland morning burned bright, sunlight glinting off Coleman Technologies' glass tower as Richard Coleman wheeled into the boardroom. The stone from Lily Bennett rested in his pocket, a talisman against the storm he was about to unleash. Mark Reynolds' trap, a late-night meeting with the fugitive mechanic Carl Hayes, loomed in his mind, but so did Lily's frail voice from Boston, urging him to Cannon Beach. Her life, teetering on the edge of recovery, and Mark's betrayal, confirmed by Hayes's damning confession, drove Richard forward. Today, he'd end this. The boardroom hummed with tension, executives' faces taut as Richard took his place. Mark stood at the head, his smile a brittle mask. "Rich, back so soon," he said, voice smooth but strained. "This obsession with old projects is getting out of hand." Richard's gaze was ice. Obsession or accountability? He tapped his tablet, projecting a damning slide. Bank transfers, emails, Mark's orders to bury Horizon Properties' toxic leaks. "You poisoned people, Mark. Kids. Lily Bennett's fighting for her life because of you." Gasps rippled through the room. Elaine Carter's eyes narrowed. "These are grave accusations, Richard." "Backed by evidence," Richard said, sliding a folder across the table. "Shell companies, falsified inspections, and this." He played Hayes's recorded confession, the mechanic's voice rough. "Reynolds paid me to cut Coleman's brakes. Wanted him gone." The room froze. Mark's face drained of color. "This is fabricated. You're desperate, Rich, clinging to a child's fairy tales. Fairy tales? Richard's voice cut like steel. Lily knew things, my past, my dreams before I did. She led me to your lies. And this, he held up a photo of the brake pad, sent as a threat. Your mistake, Mark. Elaine stood. I move for an immediate vote to suspend Mark Reynolds and approve a full audit. Seconded voices echoed, drowning Mark's protests. His mask cracked, his voice low. You'll ruin everything, Rich. You don't know who you're crossing. I know enough, Richard said, his stare unwavering. You're done. As security escorted Mark out, his glare promised vengeance. But Richard felt no fear, only resolve. The board's vote was unanimous. Coleman Technologies would face its sins, starting with the Crestwood Apartments residents, who'd be relocated and compensated. Richard's phone buzzed as he left the boardroom. Jane's name. His heart raced as he answered. Lily. She's awake, Jane said, her voice trembling with relief. The treatment worked. She's weak, but she's asking for you. Relief flooded him. I'm on my way. The jet to Boston was a whirlwind, Portland's towers fading as Richard clutched Lily's stone. At the hospital, Jane greeted him, her tired smile brighter than before. She's a miracle herself, she said, leading him to Lily's room. Lily sat up, her blonde braids loose, eyes sparkling despite her pallor. Mr. Richard, she said, grinning, you did it. You stopped the bad man. He wheeled closer, his throat tight. You knew, didn't you? About Mark. She nodded, her voice soft. My heart's dreams showed me. You needed to know. Richard pulled the stone from his pocket, placing it beside her. You were right about a lot. I'm going to Cannon Beach tomorrow. For you. Her smile widened. You'll find it there. Your miracle. Jane touched his arm. Thank you for everything. He shook his head. I owe her. She woke me up. Back in Portland the next day, Richard's driver navigated the winding road to Cannon Beach, the ocean's roar growing louder. His all-terrain wheelchair, a recent acquisition, hummed over the sand, the lighthouse rising against a clear sky. Jane and Lily, now strong enough to travel, followed in their car, a promise kept to witness this moment. At the beach's edge, Richard stopped, the stone heavy in his hand. 25 years ago, he'd stood here, dreaming of an empire. Now he was a different man, forged by Lily's faith and Mark's betrayal. He reached down, his fingers brushing the sand, and found a shell, curved, pearlescent, identical to one he'd pocketed that long-ago day. His breath caught. Lily, he called, turning to see her running toward him, her pink backpack bouncing. Look, she said, pointing to the shell. It's part of it. Jane joined them, her eyes misty. She said you'd find something here. Richard gripped the shell, its edges smooth with time. Help me stand, he said, his voice steady. With Jane and Lily steadying him, Richard transferred to a walking frame, his legs trembling but alive with new sensation. The AI therapy, funded by his company, had sparked neural recovery no doctor thought possible. He took a step, then another, the sand firm beneath him. Lily clapped, her laughter bright as the waves. It's your miracle, she shouted. Richard laughed, a sound foreign but free. You were right, kid. Jane's hand lingered on his arm. She always is. As they sat by the lighthouse, Lily shared her dream, to become a doctor, to help others as she'd helped him. Richard vowed to fund her education, and Jane's dream of a bakery, a new start for them both. Mark faced charges, fraud, attempted murder, his empire crumbling as Richard rebuilt his own, not on profit, but on purpose. The shell and stone sat on his desk now, beside the pen, reminders of a child who saw his heart when he couldn't. Cannon Beach hadn't given him legs, but it gave him peace. A miracle not in walking, but in living again. Lily, with her pink backpack and dollar promise, had been the spark. And as the waves crashed, Richard knew he'd never hide again. And so, $1 for a miracle ends with a shell, a stone, and a promise kept. Lily's gift to Richard, a spark that reignited his heart. What did you feel as their journey unfolded? Did Lily's dreams stir your hopes, or did Richard's fight awaken your belief in second chances? Drop your thoughts below, share what moved you, where you're reading from, and what you think miracles mean. Your voice matters. Thank you for joining this tale, for letting Lily and Richard into your world. Your time, your heart, it means everything. Stay tuned for more stories that light up the soul. Until next time, keep chasing your miracles.